If the video behind me looks familiar, it's Alisa Childers doing 5 more questions every Christian should be able to answer. She did part 1 on her own channel, and Vice Rhino did a response to it. Part 2 is on the channel Cross-Examined Ministries, Frank Turek's channel. In part 1, Alisa told us why slavery is perfectly fine. A link to Vice Rhino's take on that one is in the description. Today, the pop star from the group Zoe Girl tells us why genocide is perfectly fine. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Alisa starts by telling us the purpose of her video, in which I find the first problem.
Today, for Cross-Examined, I'm going to offer 5 more apologetics questions that every Christian should learn to answer. Now, these are bare bones, quick responses that Christians can easily remember and articulate.
As a believer, this is exactly the kind of thing that I ate up. When someone doesn't believe, the reasons to believe a simple and straightforward answer that you could give them is exactly what I was looking for. All you need is the answer to the common objections to the faith that you will hear, and you too can be a soul winner. You too can lead people to Christ and get another jewel in your crown and have some fruit to tell others about. Yes, that was a thing. When believers ask other believers about their walk with God, sometimes you will be asked, "Are you bearing any fruit?" To which you were supposed to tell them about all the people that you led to Christ. Never mind that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, and that winning souls for Christ isn't even mentioned. If you are a faithful Christian, you need to be reproducing, and that means bringing other people to Christ. Now, Alisa doesn't specifically say that the reason you need to learn these responses is to win people to Christ. But what I find problematic is not only the implication that convincing people of your faith is this easy, but also that you don't really need to think about this too much. You don't need to study these issues if you want to discuss them with unbelievers. All you need are these simple responses, and you are set to do battle for the Lord. And it shows. When I have conversations with believers on social media, I frequently hear these kinds of quick talking points. And when my responses don't line up with the script that they were given from people like Alisa, they don't know how to answer. Because the kinds of questions that I pose are things that they haven't likely considered. Which is exactly why I ask. Not because I'm looking for an answer, but because I am looking for someone who has actually thought through the issue and can address the problems of the issue head on, and not through soundbite answers that look good when they stand alone, but completely disintegrate when they come under scrutiny.
The first question, did Jesus claim to be God? Although Jesus didn't stand up on a mountain and proclaim in English, "I am God," there's no doubt that he did claim to be God while on earth. In fact, he did that at least 3 times. Mark 14:61 through 62 records that after Jesus' arrest, when he stood trial before the Jewish court, he was asked point blank if he was the Messiah. He answered, "I am."
Okay, so the intent of these questions is not entirely to convince unbelievers, as I can't imagine an unbeliever objecting to Christianity on these grounds.
Christianity isn't the one true faith.
Why not?
Because Jesus never claimed to be God.
Yet I also get why she has this one here. It's really a leftover from the C.S. Lewis argument that people used to use, the whole Jesus has to be the Lord of the universe because if he claimed to be God, he was either a lunatic, a liar, or the Lord of the universe. And incidentally, I was wrong about this being a leftover talking point. I had to edit the script at this point and insert because as I was writing, Robin texted me to say that there was a group on his campus holding up a sign asking, "Was Jesus a liar, lunatic, or Lord?" Oh, I wish I was there. Back to the original script. To which the unbeliever is supposed to respond, okay, but did Jesus ever claim to be God? And the believer can then use Alisa's response to prove that Jesus did in fact claim to be God. So there is a place for this argument, but without context, like she's presenting it here, it just looks weird. But as to the actual response that Jesus did claim to be God, my response is, how do you know that? Sure, it's in the Bible, but how do you know that Jesus actually ever said any of the things that are in the Bible and that the Bible claims that he said? Jesus didn't write it himself. If he had, I would be completely willing to accept that Jesus said that. Or if Jesus had a scribe that traveled with him, writing down everything that he said within a few hours or even a few days of when he said it, I would grant you that as well. If you even had eyewitnesses that a few years later said, I heard Jesus say this, that would be a bit weaker, as memories can falter. Just ask Robin how often I tell him something and then 5 minutes later tell him the same thing because I forgot that I already said that. But I would be willing to grant this too, if you had it. Instead, what you have is 4 Gospels, written by anonymous authors, all written at least 20 years after Jesus' death, and none of them purporting to be eyewitnesses to any of the events described. When your source is an anonymous person writing 20 years or more after the death of the person that they're writing about, and they never even claim to have witnessed anything they are writing about, can you really declare with any degree of confidence that Jesus actually said any of the things that are attributed to him in the Gospels? Obviously, Alisa thinks you can. But, like so many believers, she wants to address the easy question, what does the Bible say that Jesus said, instead of the hard question, do we really have any reason to believe that Jesus said anything that the Bible claims that he said? I'll skip over the rest of her point here, as all she does is elaborate on which passages of the Bible indicate Jesus' claims of godhood. When you, Alisa, answer the question of why I should believe anything in the Gospels is really something that Jesus actually said, then we will consider the importance, if any, of the God claims.
The next apologetics question every Christian should learn how to answer is, did God command the Israelites to commit genocide? For many people, one of the most troubling Bible passages is when God commanded Israel to kill every living thing in the Canaanite land. This is found in Deuteronomy 20, 16 through 18.
Indeed. A God that says genocide is okay with him is not a God I would find to be particularly benevolent. Last time she justified slavery. Let's see how she justifies genocide.
Because of this, many skeptics have accused Yahweh of divine genocide.
Yes, because that's exactly what your Bible says your God did.
Genocide is defined as killing a large group of people because of their race, religion, or nationality. But in the case of the Canaanites, they weren't killed because of their race.
Note how she defines genocide as
killing a large group of people because of their race, religion, or nationality.
But then, in saying the killing of the Canaanites wasn't genocide because they weren't killed because of their race. No, it wasn't, but they were killed because of their nationality, which was also included in the definition that you gave. How does
completely destroy them, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you,
not qualify as killing based on nationality? If God singles out 6 nationalities that the Israelites are to completely wipe out, is your point that this isn't genocide because there was more than one nationality? Because if that is your rationale, I'd really like to understand how it's genocide to kill all of one nationality, but if you kill 6 of them, that's okay. It sounds like you think mass murder isn't as bad as murder. Don't kill one people group, but killing 6 people groups is okay.
They were executed as a decree of God's righteous judgment.
Even if I grant you that somehow the Canaanites were worse sinners than these people around them, how does that justify genocide? How is it righteous judgment to pronounce a death sentence on everyone without even considering what crimes the individuals might be guilty of. More importantly, how does this justify killing the innocent with the guilty? Because don't forget, he didn't tell them to just kill the adults. He didn't limit it to those who had reached an age of accountability. He told them to kill the children too. He even specified that they were to kill the infants. What did the infants do? How were these infants evil sinners? I've heard a few apologists try to answer this one. Let's see if she even makes an attempt.
Because of their unrepentant and horrific sin. The barbarity and wickedness of the Canaanite culture is documented in an article by Clay Jones called "We Don't Hate Sin, So We Don't Understand What Happened to the Canaanites."
Let's set aside for the moment the issue of the justification of killing children to focus on the justification for killing all of the adults. Here's the paper she's referencing. His thesis is that in our culture, we are just as wicked and evil as the Canaanites. Therefore, we don't see the sins that they committed as being desperately wicked and deserving of death as we should see them, because we accept some of these behaviors as normal behaviors. His major premise is God tells Israel in Deuteronomy 9:5, "This was not because of your righteousness or your integrity, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, that he was driving out the Canaanites." The Bible is unambiguous concerning what sins they committed, including idolatry, incest, adultery, child sacrifice, homosexuality, and bestiality. But I don't see that lack of ambiguity at all. The verse that he references doesn't even mention these sins. I checked the rest of the chapter and the next chapter and didn't find this there either. I looked through the rest of his paper for his sources for the sins of the Canaanites, and sometimes they come from the Bible, but sometimes they come from other historical sources. So his claim that the Bible is unambiguous, that these are the sins of the Canaanites, and that they were committing these sins that ticked God off so badly that he needed to commit genocide, is underwhelming at best. The fact that when this subject comes up, most apologists all go to child sacrifice rather than this list of atrocities is further evidence that this list is not as biblically unambiguous as the author claims. He specifies 5 behaviors that they engaged in as the justification for their annihilation. 1. Idolatry. I get why this would tick God off, as the God of the Old Testament is jealous and even a childish God that gets upset if his people even think about worshiping another God. But what happened to the free will that God supposedly gave humans? If humans are supposed to be free to accept or reject God as they choose, then idolatry shouldn't even be a sin. It's just an exercise of the free will that God gave us. But if you make the wrong choice, now you will be punished for making that wrong choice. If there is a wrong choice, then there never was a free will choice in the first place. There was only 2 paths and a directive to take one. If God is telling you, you must go that way or else, then you have not been given a free will choice on which path to take. 2. Incest. Really? I mean, God forced the offspring of Adam and Eve to commit incest by only making one original pair. If God thought incest was a sin, why didn't he make a bunch of people instead of just 2? If God really had a problem with incest, why did he force incest? And then Abraham married his sister, or at least his half-sister, and God had no problem with it. This point runs directly contrary to another of the author's premises. Today we see incest as more problematic than ancient peoples did. 3. I'm skipping adultery, as I don't really want to get bogged down in this paper and not get to the main point of focus here. 4. Child sacrifice. This is the one that I usually see apologists go to, but there are several problems with justifying genocide based on child sacrifice. First, the historical evidence shows that the ancient Israelites themselves engaged in child sacrifice. The Bible alludes to it in a couple of places. Abraham nearly sacrifices Isaac on the altar, but he never questions the morality of child sacrifice. Jephthah vows to sacrifice as a burnt offering whatever first comes out of the doors of his house. He is sad when it turns out to be his only child. Christians say that she was just dedicated to God and went to live at the temple after this, but a couple of problems with reading this into the passage. First, if that was the case, why was Jephthah so sad? He could still go and see her there, just as Hannah saw Samuel every year after dedicating him to God and leaving him to be raised at the temple. Second, what did Jephthah expect to come out of his house? A goat? Did he have animals living in his house? Or was he hoping it would be his wife because he didn't want her anymore? That would make for an interesting passage. I've never heard of sacrificing your spouse. Finally, if you don't have a copy of Dr. Josh Bowen's book, The Atheist's Guide to the Old Testament, I highly recommend it. On pages 125 to 133, he goes through the historical evidence and concludes that there is more evidence that the Israelites sacrificed children to Yahweh than there is of any widespread Canaanite practice of child sacrifice. The entire justification of genocide based on child sacrifice is more projecting than it is on a condemnation from a position of righteousness. Furthermore, how is the practice of child sacrifice a justification for killing children? If the sentence of genocide was on all of the adults because they were all involved in this, a position I find highly improbable, how can you possibly use that as a justification for killing children? Killing children is wrong, so we will kill all of your children so that you can never kill children again. This makes absolutely no sense. 5. His last points are on homosexuality and bestiality. The author is right that today we know that there's nothing wrong with homosexuality, and he points to religious rituals that involve male temple sex workers. He does the same with bestiality, claiming that this was part of their worship of their God as well. All of his points come down to God didn't like the way the Canaanites worshiped their God. Their worship included sex and child sacrifice, and God didn't like that, so he wanted them all dead. Frankly, I find such a God to be more like a whiny child that is upset that not everyone likes him, rather than a God that has any kind of moral high ground.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
This was a lot of discussion on a paper that isn't the main point, but I felt we really needed to see how Alisa's point not only doesn't justify her God, she is still stuck with a God that commits genocide. No church or individual has the right to condemn an entire culture. If her God is supposed to be the source of absolute moral behavior, then this moral absolute should apply to God too. Of course, if God is subject to this moral absolute, then he can't also be the source of the absolute. But that's a different topic. Moreover, her God somehow justifies killing children for the acts of the adults in their lives. This isn't judgment. This isn't righteous. It's just slaughter of the innocent.
As further proof that it wasn't about race, it should be noted that God later executed the same judgment on his own people for the same sin.
Where? When did God wipe out every man, woman, and child in Israel for these practices? And even if it was true, doesn't that just show how inept your God is? His plan to keep his people pure from sin was to kill all the sinners, but it didn't work. His people became sinners anyway. It took all of one generation before the Israelites were doing the same things as the Canaanites before them, even according to the Bible. So if God is omniscient and knew that this was going to happen, why kill all these people, especially the children, when he already knew that absolutely nothing would be accomplished by doing so?
In his mercy, God sent prophets to warn the Canaanites to repent of their heinous deeds. He even gave them hundreds of years to turn to him, yet they refused to listen.
Where is there even a single verse about any prophet being sent to the Canaanites before the Israelites arrive, warning them to repent? The first recorded prophet to anyone other than the Israelites that I'm aware of is Jonah. Jonah doesn't arrive on the scene for another 400 years. If anyone watching is aware of an earlier warning to the Canaanite people prior to Jonah, please leave a comment about this, Prophet, in the comment section. When I ask this question of believers, the response I get is, well, God had to have told them.
The Canaanite conquest wasn't genocide. It was capital punishment.
Capital punishment with no trial, no opportunity for the innocent to escape, and it included killing children, even infants. How can anyone with a straight face claim that one can convict an infant of a capital crime and then justify killing said infant? How can anyone with any modicum of integrity claim that an entire culture is justly worthy of extermination? How can you not see that every individual in the culture would have to be involved in these practices? And if every individual is not guilty, then it isn't capital punishment. It's genocide. There's even a story in Genesis 18 about how Abraham goes to God with this very argument. God says he's going to wipe out the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sins so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. Incidentally, where's the omniscience? If not, I will know. The men turned away, these are the three angels that had visited Abraham, and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? We see Abraham pleading the case of the innocent, and that a righteous judge would not kill the innocent with the guilty. In the end, God decides that only Lot, Abraham's nephew, is innocent, so he and his family get rescued. But again, what about the children? They are not guilty, yet they are killed too. Even though Abraham has just reminded God that killing the innocent with the guilty is not right.
The third question, is the concept of the Trinity a logical fallacy? According to the law of non-contradiction, two contradictory statements can't both be true at the same time and in the same sense. You may hear someone say, 3 beings in 1 being. That's illogical. The statement 3 beings in 1 being actually does violate the law of non-contradiction and is in fact illogical. But this isn't the correct definition of the Trinity. The Trinity isn't 3 beings in 1 being, but 3 persons in 1 being.
I'm wondering who the audience is for this now. She did say that these were supposed to be 5 questions Christians should know the answer to, not 5 questions to stump atheists or anything like that. But really, who cares? What's the point here? If a believer believes in the Trinity but doesn't get the wording of why they think God is a Trinity right, how does that matter? If the point is to be able to explain your faith, okay, but is there anyone that really cares about how you explain the Trinity? Isn't it enough to say that you believe in the Trinity? Believers will know what you mean, and unbelievers really won't care if you believe your God is a Trinity or not. I suppose it could come up in a conversation with Muslims that say that God isn't a Trinity. For me, though, it's a point without any substance.
Personhood is defined as a distinct center of consciousness, and Trinity is one essence or being in 3 distinct persons. It may not be easy to comprehend, but it's not a logical fallacy.
Now you have my attention. Because don't believers make the argument that a fetus is a person just because it has life, and that it is a person despite having no consciousness, as there is no brain activity until about week 20. If personhood is defined as
a distinct center of consciousness,
then you have just defined fetuses to not be persons. Congratulations. Welcome to the pro-choice position.
The fourth question, don't all religions basically say the same thing?
In one sense, yes. They all involve claims about the supernatural and about God. But for the most part, no. Even among Christians, the beliefs and practices vary greatly.
So remember that law of non-contradiction we mentioned a minute ago? It's going to come in handy here. Keep in mind that two contradictory statements can't both be true at the same time and in the same sense. Let's apply that to two major world religions, Christianity and Islam.
Why those two? Most likely because those are the two her audience is most familiar with.
Both Christianity and Islam teach that Jesus existed and was a prophet. But Christianity teaches that Jesus died, while Islam teaches Jesus never died. Considering that the entire belief system of Christianity stands or falls based upon the resurrection of Jesus being a historical event, as we learn in 1 Corinthians 15:17, it really matters whether or not he actually died.
I actually found this interesting as I didn't know this. I don't know much about the Muslim faith, but from what I'm reading, they have a few different theories on this. From Jesus swooned to they didn't hang Jesus, they hung a substitute, and some even say that Jesus died a natural death eventually after preaching for many more years, and some say that he ascended into heaven and never died at all. Also interesting how she sneaks in that Jesus' resurrection was a historical event based on 1 Corinthians 15:17, as if this epistle is somehow an historical document. Then, when we go to the actual verse that she cites, all it says is, "And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins." How is this historical evidence that there was a resurrection? Not only does it not claim any kind of witness to such an event, it doesn't even say that Jesus was raised from the dead. It just says that if Jesus wasn't raised, then Christianity is a false religion. Much like what Dr. Craig said last week about no resurrection being game over for Christianity. If this is the best that you can do to show that there was a resurrection, that if there wasn't, your faith is in trouble, I think you have a problem.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up. Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
Major malfunction.
In fact, if Islam is correct, then Christianity as a religion is fundamentally untrue. Although many religions agree on some moral principles, for example, that we should treat each other with kindness and help those in need, it's more important to look at their disagreements. These are core disagreements that violate the law of non-contradiction and can't both be true at the same time and in the same sense. Many religions have some beliefs in common, but at their core, all religions are not basically saying the same thing.
But why does that matter? Why do you think yours is right and the others are wrong? Or do you? Maybe you think any of these religions are okay. You just need to pick one and believe it because all that God cares about is that you believe in something. I have met people who think this, but I seriously doubt that Alisa is one of them. I feel like this is another point without substance. Okay, different religions are different. So what? Why is it important that Christians are able to say this?
The fifth and final question every Christian should learn to answer is there any scientific evidence for the existence of God?
Wow. She has 1 minute, 10 seconds left, and she's going to tackle the evidence for the existence of God. I feel like if there was good scientific evidence for the existence of God, it would take more than a minute to present the scientific papers supporting this. Any bets on how many science papers she's going to present in this last minute?
Well, contrary to what many atheists would have you believe, there's quite a bit of positive scientific evidence for the existence of God. There are several disciplines such as archaeology, intelligent design, and cosmology that are providing this evidence. Here's one example. The law of causation states that anything that had a beginning must have a cause.
Wait a minute. How did the Kalam cosmological argument become scientific evidence? This is a philosophical argument, not a scientific study. And the law of causation? This was a new one on me. When I Googled it, the first thing I got was the legal term. I'm quite familiar with this. You can't sue someone and win if you didn't cause the harm that you're suing for. But this clearly isn't what she means. I found an entry under philosophy that says that every change in nature is produced by a cause. This is likely what she means. I did check law of causation science, and I got the relativistic principle of causality says that the cause must precede its effect. I don't think this is what she was going for either. Okay, so her scientific evidence is evidence from philosophy, despite her claim that this comes from
Archaeology, intelligent design, and cosmology.
darn. I was really looking forward to how archaeology proves a law of cause and effect, or how intelligent design ended up in a list of science disciplines.
The consensus of modern science is that the universe is not eternal, but had a beginning point.
This is far from a consensus. There are a number of theories about how the universe began, and they don't all have a non-eternal universe model.
Therefore, the universe had to be caused by something. The only thing that could have caused time, space, and matter to come into existence out of nothing would have to be something that is itself outside of time, space, and matter.
Why? Because you said so? You said you were going to give us scientific proof of God, and instead you gave us a philosophical argument that proposes one solution, your preferred solution. And you declare it as proof that your solution is the right one because, I don't know, she doesn't even give us a reason. She thinks this is the only possible explanation, so it must be the only possible explanation. What I'd really like to know is, does she think that because she has never heard any other possible explanations? Has she read any but just doesn't find them credible? If so, tell us why the alternatives aren't credible. I suspect that this is what she was told, so this is what she believes, which is just sad. If you want to talk about how this proves your point, at least be familiar with the arguments against your point. Alisa, if you want to be taken seriously, don't gloss over major points of contention to present only your side of what you want your viewers to see.
And what would have the intelligence to make such a universe so finely tuned for the existence of life?
You have assumed that natural processes require an intelligence behind them. They don't. You have assumed that the world is finely tuned. You have to substantiate that claim.
Here's what it comes down to. Either a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and immensely powerful cause, which happens to sound a lot like the God of the Bible.
And now you jump from a whole bunch of assumptions to, gee, this really looks to me like God. So it must be God. That makes about as much sense as, gee, this rock sure looks a lot like an elephant. It must be an elephant.
Brought the universe into existence out of nothing, or nothing did. For more, you can go to Alisa Childers.
Oh, good. She gave us an alternative. Nothing did. I'm going with nothing did. You really haven't given me any reason to go with your option. Live your life.
The Canaanite conquest wasn't genocide. It was capital punishment.